I suppose I'd say the greatest challenge is just this supply and demand disconnect, right? There's not enough talent or skills-based available, particularly in the very high demand fields or occupations, whatever term we want to use, like coding and analytics and certain areas of healthcare. And so there's zones where employers just can't find the right people or the right skills or enough people. And these alternative credentials and alternative educational institutions have emerged to fill that gap. Universities, for the most part, haven't kept up with their program offerings, and they haven't been nimble enough to develop the education that's needed. And so other providers have stepped into this gap, and companies themselves, in some cases, have said, if we're going to hire tens of thousands of people to work in cloud computing, and we also want our brand to be that we're known as the best in cloud computing, maybe we should develop an educational program and take our internal curriculum and turn it out to the world and use that as a way to find talent. So there's a lot of possibilities. One thing that I think about often is that if you think about a typical corporation, even a giant corporation with significant resources, they don't have a liaison for higher education. They don't have a function of the company that's concerned with relationships with colleges and universities necessarily. Some do, but it will probably be more for college recruiting, someone who goes out to a campus and hires new MBA graduates. You have areas of companies that interact with university researchers. You have areas of companies that interact with colleges to get them to develop some training for some of their employees. But it's siloed. And so there's certainly not a C-suite person. It exists in the different domains and divisions of the company. And then on top of that, on the higher education side, we don't do a very good job for the most part with employer relations. And our relationships with companies are often housed in individuals. And so I'm not suggesting that the solution is that companies invest in a role and that colleges and universities create an office or a liaison, although some have, and that can be very useful. But that structurally, it's hard to facilitate the interaction compared to, an example might be, a company has probably a chief legal person, and that's going to be the person that interacts with the law firm and understands regulation, and there's a clear one-to-one kind of connection point. Another thing, it's a long answer, but another thing is the tools. And that's an area where, of course, these educational technology companies are sprouting up and developing, and big technology companies are investing more in systems that can facilitate some of this, because hiring and finding talent and doing a better job at assessment and identifying talent and skill has now become an area of competitive advantage. So there's a lot of venture capital money and there's a lot of corporate attention now going into how do we bridge this gap through various technologies. I mean, we've found at scale, we have, I'm trying to recall the exact numbers, but maybe 15,000 plus students a year do a cooperative education placement, at least that, maybe many thousands more. And we have the 3,000 employer partnerships. We've worked with our employers for decades. We've surveyed them. We talk with them all the time. And they keep employing students because it's a model that works. They see ROI. It works very well for the students. There's proven educational outcomes. But one of the reasons that we haven't seen more cooperative education worldwide is it could be hard culturally and infrastructure-wise to build your program or your institution around that rotation. So you have students who are on campus and then they're out working, and it impacts your model for tuition, it impacts your housing that you need on campus, and certainly the biggest thing is the resources that you need. We have hundreds of professionals who do career advising and employer relations, and the faculty culture as well. The faculty need to be accepting and bought into the idea that the students are coming in with experience, and that the focus is more applied than it might be in a more theoretical environment. So there's a number of hurdles, but I know there's great interest among many educational institutions in smaller forms of that model, or in maybe launching cooperative education programs for a certain degree area or in a certain college. And so we're very excited to help with that and help study and facilitate it. Yeah, and in the way, one area that is happening on I'll call it a micro level, is in online projects, project-based learning and challenge-based learning, which is very common with new online credentials, with master's programs, and with boot camps. So maybe it's not a full-time job. That's traditionally more for the residential student, the full-time student, where they're going to study for a period and then they can work at an employer. In this world of online education and lifelong learning, you can be employed at a company and not leave your employer, but do a project that helps get you into the new domain that you're interested in. Generally, corporate learning and development, and even the basics of how hiring works, much less I specialize in educational credentials and how that plays a role in the process, but in general, how companies hire, how they make decisions, how they design jobs, it's an understudied area. And so when you put this all together, we still have a lot of things to understand, a lot more research to do, and I think one of the challenges certainly is it's an interesting time worldwide politically and in terms of policy, and what are corporate responsibilities and what's the responsibility of government, and what do we tax for, and how much do individuals pay? And those types of trade-offs and questions are at the heart of how do you develop an economy, right? And who benefits? The main trend in the US certainly, and I think it's true worldwide, for better or for worse, is that education has gone from being seen as a public good to more of a private good. So, okay, we charge tuition for it, and the government maybe invests less, companies invest less, and it's more up to the individual. And if that's the situation, then individuals need maybe assurances or accounts that they can invest in this, or different tax credits, advising and support and mentoring and coaching over the course of their career, right? It would be a whole new environment. And I think that is happening right now, but we're in the early days of understanding how it shakes out. Yeah, well, if you think about the category of alternative credentials or micro-credentials compared to a degree, if we just think of those as two different categories and we'll compare them, the real value proposition for the alternative credentials is they tend to be more targeted and more specific. They're more focused, right? And that's part of kind of by definition. They're smaller and they're targeted. But that therefore demonstrates to an employer that you have a specialization, right? That you've really maybe mastered something specific, compared to degrees tend to be broad, and you don't quite know often in a degree, well, how much of this was included in it. When you've earned a alternative credential, it is more about specialization. They also tend to be more verifiable in the sense that you can share them on social media. You can often click through and verify that someone actually earned this credential, which for some is an important thing. And certainly, again, almost by definition, they're more affordable. So that's where the question comes in. Do you need a degree, or is a degree just a useful thing, or does it not matter at all? And instead, might it make sense to have an alternative offering or an alternative credential? So it becomes a way that you can signal your learning and your professional competency and gain access to actual learning and skill development at a lower cost, and you get something in the end. You get something that can go on a resume. And then the added bonus that's now emerging is that doesn't have to be a trade-off with a degree. Maybe in the past and of course it's not always the case, but in the past maybe you had to decide between a great seminar or a training or spending money out of pocket for a degree. Today, maybe you can get a micro-credential that's targeted, and then you can stack that credit into a degree credential down the line, is at least where the market seems to be moving.